Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming together to join in this rich tradition we call Torah, which consists not only of words that were written thousands of years ago, but also words that we bring forth in this very moment. And we are now in Parshat Vayeshev, in the book of Genesis, beginning with the very start of chapter 37. If you'd like to go ahead and unmute together, we can recite our blessing, giving thanks for this moment. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav la'asot b'divrei Torah. Thank you, God, for the opportunity to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. One of the lessons that we get from reading Torah is the remembrance that we ourselves did not get here and accomplish what we managed to accomplish solely on our own, and that also those who came before us, who are no longer physically with us, still walk with us on this journey in some capacity. So in that regard, I'd like to take this moment to have us dedicate this week's Torah portion to someone whose yahrzeit I've just learned is just about at this moment, and that's Arthur Schneider. And so, Joanne, would you like to unmute for a moment and just share us just a few words about your father, what makes him so special for you and for all of us?
Well, thank you, Rabbi. My dad was born in Long Beach, raised in actually he was born in LA, but at 1 year before he was one, he came to Long Beach, and his family was part of the one of the founding families of Temple Israel. And I had the pleasure of, at the end of his life, taking him back to Long Beach and spending as much time with him as in Long Beach. And he was a physician. And he and my mom were married for 60 years. She died in 2011. And pretty much after she died, I took over his care. And he retired actually from being a professor of in charge of the pathology, the department chair of pathology at Chicago Medical School when he was about 86 years old, which is pretty amazing, And anyway, he was the most gentle, wonderful man, and he loved going to Temple Israel, and he loved going to Rabbi Moskowitz's Torah study on Saturday. And I feel like he is just here tonight, a part of this group. And Rabbi, thank you so much for giving me a chance to share a little about him.
Of course.
Thank you so much. By the way, he had his confirmation at Temple Israel, and that's pretty cool too. That was when Temple Israel had confirmations and not bar mitzvahs, so that was pretty nice.
So the one thing that you said right before we started recording was you're obviously a very outdoors person, skiing and skating and so forth. And you said that whenever you would come back home or back inside after all this activity, tell us again what.
Oh, yes. By the way, I always called my father Daddy. And so my daddy would be sitting there waiting for me, no matter what activity. I'd be riding my bike or my scooter on the bike path in Long Beach, or I'd be in Colorado. I'd take him with me to places to ski. He'd sit there waiting for me because he loved to go out to dinner. He just loved go out to any meal, but as soon as I got back, that's what we did. We went out to eat. And wow. I have numerous pictures of him enjoying eating out. And one of the places he loved to eat out, I think many people here have been to, the ones from Long Beach, is the Gotella Deli. So
beautiful. Well, our story our story that's a personal story that you've just shared with us about your immediate father, Arthur. We're now going to immerse ourselves in a story about others who walked the path before us and helped us reach this moment. And so we bring up this mythology as we also honor your own personal biography and that of your father. So thank you very much for being here and sharing your story of your father with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi
God bless his memory. We will read through the English translation of our Torah portion, then I'll share with you a little bit of a focus study, and then we'll open up for our collaborative conversation. Let me share with you the opening verses, and then I'll invite others to read as well. Genesis chapter 37. Now Jacob settled in the land where his father had sojourned, the land of Canaan. This then is the line of Jacob. At 17 years of age, Joseph tended the flocks with his brothers as a helper to the sons of his father's wives, Bilhah and Zilpah. And Joseph brought bad reports of them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph best of all his sons, for he was the child of his old age. And he had made him a coat with many stripes. And when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of his brothers, they hated him so that he could not speak a friendly word to him. Richard, would you like to read a little bit starting at verse 5?
Yes, thank you. Once Joseph had a dream, which he told to his brothers, and they hated him even more. He said to them, "Hear this dream which I have dreamed. There we were binding sheaves in the field, and suddenly my sheaf stood up and remained upright. Then your sheaves gathered round and bowed low to my sheaf." His brothers answered, "Do you mean to reign over us? Do you mean to rule over us?" And they hated him even more for his talk about his dreams. He dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers, saying, "Look, I have had another dream, and this time the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." And when he told it to his father and brothers, his father berated him. "What?" he said to him. "Is this dream you have dreamed? Are we to come, I and your mother and your brothers, and bow low to you to the ground?" So his brothers were wrought up at him, and his father kept the matter in mind.
Thank you. Kath, would you like to read starting at verse 12?
Thank you, Rabbi. One time, when his brothers had gone to pasture their father's flocks at Shechem, Israel said to Joseph, "Your brothers are pasturing at Shechem. Come, and I will send you to them." He answered, "I am ready." And he said to him, "Go and see how your brothers are and how the flocks are faring, and bring me back word." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron. When he reached Shechem, a man came upon him wandering in the fields. The man asked him, "What are you looking for?" He answered, "I am looking for my brothers. Could you tell me where they are pasturing?" The man said, "They have gone from here, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph followed his brothers and found them at Dothan.
Thank you. Anna, would you, okay. Let me invite June, would you like to read starting at verse 18?
Thank you, Rabbi. They saw him from afar, and before he came close to them, they conspired to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes that dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits, and we can say, 'A savage beast devoured him.' We shall see what comes of his dream." But when Reuben heard it, he tried to save him from them. He said, "Let us not take his life." And Reuben went on, "Shed no blood. Cast him into that pit out in the wilderness, but do not touch him yourself," intending to save him from them and restore him to his father. When Joseph came up to his brothers, they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the ornamented tunic that he was wearing, and took him and cast him into the pit. The pit was empty. There was no water in it.
Thank you, June. Let me invite Margot, would you like to read starting at verse 25?
Yes, thank you. Then they sat down to a meal. Looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilad, their camels bearing gum, balm, and laudanum to be taken to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, What do we gain by killing our brother and covering up his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, but but let us not do away with him ourselves. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh. His brothers agreed. When the Midianite traders passed by, they pulled Joseph up out of the pit. They sold Joseph pieces of silver to the Ishmaelites who brought Joseph to Egypt.
Thank you so much. And Paul, would you like to read starting at verse 29?
Thank you, Rabbi. Reuben returned to the pit, and behold, Joseph was not in the pit. So he rent his garments. Returning to his brothers, he said, "The boy is gone, and where can I go?" They took Joseph's tunic, slaughtered a goatling, and dipped the tunic in the blood. They dispatched a fine woolen tunic, and they brought it to their father and said, "We found this. Identify, if you please. Is it your son's tunic or not?" He recognized it, and he said, "My son's tunic. A savage beast devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to bits." Then Jacob rent his garments and placed sackcloth on his loins. He mourned for his son many days. All his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him. But he refused to comfort himself and said, "For I will go down to the grave mourning for my son." And his father bewailed him. Now the Midianites had sold him to Egypt, to Potiphar, a courtier of Pharaoh, the chamberlain of the butchers.
Thank you so much. And then we're now turning to chapter 38. Dave Leb, would you like to read a little bit at the very start of it?
About that time, Judah left his brothers and camped near a certain Adulamite whose name was Hira. There Judah saw the daughters of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua, and he took her into his household as a wife and cohabited with her. She conceived and bore a son, and he named it She conceived again and bore a son, and named him Onan. Once again she bore a son, and named him Shelah. He was at Chezib when she bore him. Judah got a wife for his firstborn. Her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was displeasing to Adonai, and Adonai took his life. Then Judah said to Onan, "Join with your brother's wife and do your duty as a brother-in-law and provide offspring for your brother." But Onan, knowing that the offspring would not count as his, let the semen go to waste whenever he joined with his brother's wife, so as not to provide offspring for his brother. What he did was displeasing to Adonai, who took his life also. Then Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, "Stay as a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up," for he thought he too might die like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's house.
Thank you. David and Susan, would you like to read starting at verse 12?
And then the days were many, and Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died, and Judah was consoled. And he went up to his sheep shearers and his friend Hira, the Adulamite, to Timnah. And it was told to Tamar, saying, "Here, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep." And she took off her widowhood clothes from on her and covered herself with a veil and wrapped herself and sat in a visible place that was on the road to Timnah, because she saw that Shelah had grown up and she'd not been given to him as a wife. And Judah saw her and thought her to be a prostitute because she had covered her face. And he turned to her by the road and he said, "Come on, let me come to you," because he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, what will you give me when you come to me? And he said, I will have a goat kid sent from the flock. And she said, if you'll give me a pledge until you send it. And he said, what's the pledge that I give you? And she said, your seal and your cord and your staff that's in your hand. And he gave them to her, and he came to her, and she became pregnant by him. Susan, are you gonna be able to read?
Sure. And she rose and went her way and took off the veil she was wearing and put on her widow's garb. And Judah sent the kid by the hand of his friend, the Adullamite, to take back the pledge from the woman's hand, and he did not find her. And he asked the men of the place, saying, excuse me, where is the cult harlot, the one at Enaim by the road? And they said, there has been no cult harlot here. And he returned to Judah and said, I could not find her. And the men of the place said as well, there has been no cult harlot there. And Judah said, let her take them, lest we be a laughingstock. Look, I sent this kid and you could not find her.
Thank you both very much. Let me invite Robert. Would you like to read starting at verse 24?
Yes, thank you. And it came to pass about 3 months after that it was told Judah, saying, behold, she is with child by whoredom. And Judah said, bring her forth and let her be burned. When she was brought forth, she sent to her father-in-law, saying, by the man whose these are, by the man whose these are, I am with child. And she said, discern, I pray thee, whose are these, the signet, the bracelets, and staff? And Judah acknowledged them and said, she hath been more righteous than I, because that I gave her not to Shelah my son, and he knew her again no more. And it came to pass in the time of her travail that, behold, twins were in her womb. And it came to pass when she travailed that the one put out his hand, and the midwife took and bound upon his hand a scarlet thread, saying, this came out first. And it came to pass, as he drew back his hand, that behold, his brother came out. And she said, how hast thou broken forth? This breach be upon thee. Therefore his name was called Pharez. And afterward came out his brother that had the scarlet thread upon his hand, and his name was called Zerah.
Thank you so much. And Martin, would you like to read at the very start of chapter 39?
Yes, thank you. When Joseph was taken down to Egypt, a certain Egyptian, Potiphar, a courtier of Pharaoh, and his chief steward brought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man, and he stayed in the house of his Egyptian master. And when his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord lent success to everything he undertook, he took a liking to Joseph. He made him his personal attendant and put him in charge of his household, placing in his hands all that he owned. And from the time that the Egyptian put him in charge of his household and of all that he owned, the Lord blessed his house for Joseph's sake, so that the blessing of the Lord was upon everything that he owned, in the house and outside. He left all that he had in Joseph's hands, and with him there, he paid attention to nothing save the food that he ate. Now Joseph was well built and handsome.
Thank you so much. And Joanne, would you like to read a little bit starting at verse 7?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. After a time, his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph and said, lie with me. But he refused. He said to his master's wife, look, with me here, my master gives no thought to anything in this house, and all that he owns he has placed in my hands. He wields no more authority in this house than I, and he has withheld nothing from me except yourself, since you are his wife. How then could I do the most wicked thing and sin before God? And much as she coaxed Joseph day after day, he did not yield to her request to lie beside her, to be with her. One such day he came into the house to do his work, none of the household being there inside. She caught hold of him by his garment and said, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and got away and fled outside. When she saw that he had left it in her hand and had fled outside, she called out to her servants and said to them, "Look, he had to bring us a Hebrew to dally with us. This one came to lie with me, but I screamed loud. And when he heard me screaming at the top of my voice, he left his garment with me and got away and fled outside." She kept his garment beside her until his master came home. Then she told him the same story, saying, "The Hebrew slave whom you brought into our house came to me to dally with me. But when I screamed at the top of my voice, he left his garment with me and fled outside."
Thank you so much. And Rose, do you want to read a little bit, starting at verse 19?
Thank you, Rabbi. Yeah, I'm sorry, there's something wrong with my camera. Hold on a sec.
Okay.
Sorry, verse 19?
Yes. Is that going to be okay, Rose?
No, that's fine. Then she went on her, I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong.
It's chapter 39, verse 19.
I'm very sorry, I'm having some computer problems. Chapter 39, verse 19, okay. Hold on. Thank you, everybody, for being patient. When his master heard the story that his wife told him, namely, "Thus and so your slave did to me," he was furious. So Joseph's master had him put in prison where the king's prisoners were confined. But even while he was there in prison, Hashem was with Joseph, extending kindness to him and disposing. Hold on. Okay. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, just a sec. And whatever he did, Hashem is. I'm sorry.
Okay. And disposed the chief jailer favorably toward him. And now verse
Okay. There we go.
22.
Disposing the chief jailer favorably toward him. The chief jailer put in Joseph's charge all the prisoners who were there in that prison, and he was the only one to carry everything that was done there. Thank you.
Okay. And I'll just read to verse 23. The chief jailer did not supervise anything that was in Joseph's charge, because Adonai was with him, and whatever he did, Adonai made successful. Now we're on chapter 40. Jay, would you like to read a little bit, starting with verse 1?
Thank you, Rabbi. Sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt gave offense to their lord, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two courtiers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and put them in custody in the house of the chief steward, in the same prison house where Joseph was confined. The chief steward assigned Joseph to them, and he attended them. When they had been in custody for some time, both of them, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, dreamed in the same night, each his own dream, and each dream with its own meaning. When Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw that they were distraught. He asked Pharaoh's courtiers who were with him in custody in his master's house, saying, "Why do you appear downcast today?" And they said to him, "We had dreams, and there is no one to interpret them." So Joseph said to them, "Surely God can interpret. Tell me your dreams."
Thank you, Jay. And Justin, would you like to read starting at verse 9?
Thank you, Rabbi. So the chief cupbearer related his dream to Joseph, and he said to him, "In my dream, behold, a vine is before me, and on the vine there are 3 tendrils. and it seemed to be blossoming, and its buds came out. Then its clusters ripened into grapes. And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I placed the cup on Pharaoh's palm. And Joseph said to him, this is its meaning. The 3 tendrils are 3 days. In another 3 days, Pharaoh will number you with the other officers, and he will restore you to your position, and you will place Pharaoh's cup into his hand, according to your previous custom when you were his cup bearer. But remember me when things go well with you, and please do me a favor and mention me to Pharaoh, and you will get me out of this house. For I was stolen from the land of the Hebrews, and here too I have done nothing for which they have put me into the dungeon. Now the chief baker saw that he had interpreted well, so he said to Joseph, me too. In my dream, behold, there were 3 wicker baskets on my head, and in the topmost basket were all kinds of Pharaoh's food, the work of a baker, and the birds were eating them from the basket atop my head. And Joseph replied and said, this is its meaning. The 3 baskets represent 3 days. In another 3 days, Pharaoh will remove your head from you and hang you on the gallows, and the birds will eat your flesh off you. And now it came about on the 3rd day, Pharaoh's birthday, that Pharaoh made a feast for all his servants, and he counted the chief cupbearer and the chief baker among his servants. And he restored the chief cupbearer to his position as cupbearer, and he placed a cup on Pharaoh's palm. And the chief baker he hanged, as Joseph had interpreted to them. But the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, and he forgot him.
Wow. Thank you all very much. That's our entire Torah portion for the week. I'd like to share with you a little bit of a focus study, then we'll open it up for our collaborative conversation about it. And especially as Justin was reading the concluding portion of our weekly portion, this powerful dream, and I'm was just overwhelmed with remembering that Jacob starts this journey for his family, what becomes his family, by having a dream. If you remember where he leaves home, and the first thing that happens to him after he leaves the familiarity of the home is he has this extraordinary dream of a ladder going up to heaven and angels going up and then down the ladder and then experiencing the presence of God. What an extraordinary way to start one's journey outside the familiarity and the framework of the home in which one has grown up. And he has what at this point is his youngest son, Joseph, who seems to inherit this capacity for having dreams and being able to not only have dreams, but also to perhaps live with inside the dreams of others, to be able to understand what they really portend and what they might mean. And it just occurred to me as I got swept up in the realization of the powerful role that dreams play in the storyline that we're now in, that the artist I chose for an image this week is Salvador Dali. And Salvador Dali was, as a surrealist, was one who expressed his own creativity through surrealism, which was an exploration of the dreamscape of our lives, the subconscious, the non-rational. And yet the painting that I chose is a rather early piece, 1925, that is not surrealistic. It is quite representational. And in my mind's eye, anyway, it made me think of a wonderful American classic artist, Andrew Wyeth, in his capacity to draw figures in some solitude, perhaps certainly solitary figures, often gazing out on a landscape of some kind. So I was just thinking, as Justin was reading, I was thinking, why would someone who was so enthralled with the subconscious and with the surreal have painted this particular individual in this way? From 1927 on, pretty much, from what I could gather from doing some quick looking at some artwork today, from 1927 onward, Dali was fully immersed in the surrealist expression of life. And there was just a few times when he extracted himself from that dimension and that form of expression to paint in a more representational manner. And this, what I saw in my looking through art today, is that those times was when he was painting someone who was personally very dear to him, whether it was his, at least someone who was personally significant to him, whether it was his lover, his wife, his father, and here we have his sister. So it just kind of was fascinating to me that here is we're dealing with dreams. We've got a painter who is famous for dealing with the world of dreams, and yet here is this figure that is quite representational. Well, maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get through our little discussion here. I've entitled this week's study session "The Uses of a Cloak" because as I was studying this week's Torah portion, I was struck by the number of times that garments play a significant role in driving the narrative forward. And so here in number 1, I've shared those. First is from chapter 37. Now Israel loved Joseph best of all his sons, for he was the child of his old age. He made him a striped cloak. And we know what that cloak, then the role the cloak plays in further driving a wedge between Joseph and the rest of his brothers, and how they become enraged, and how they eventually sell him into slavery. The next is from incidents from chapter 38, and this has to do with Tamar. She took off her widow garment, covered her face with a veil, and wrapping herself up, sat down at the entrance to Enaim. First of all, I'm fascinated by this name of this place, Enaim, which in Hebrew is related to the word eyes. So there's something that's it marks us perhaps as a place of revelation, of revealing, and it's going to be a revealing through a disguise that this woman wrapped herself up in. So we know this plays a significant role. She disguises herself. She has this relationship with Judah, and that eventually brings about an encounter between Tamar and Judah, in which Judah now acknowledges that, she's far more righteous than me. And that is going to play a significant role a few portions down when Judah and the rest of his brothers confront Joseph. And then the final portion that I picked out that has to do with the role of a garment and how it drives forward the narrative has to do with Potiphar's wife and how she is attracted to Joseph. She wants to sleep with him, and they are alone and they are close and intimate. And then Joseph runs off, leaving his garment in her hands, which she then uses as a piece of evidence for her claim that Joseph forced himself upon her. And that results in him being tossed into prison. So we have this from chapter 39. He left his garment with me and fled outside. So here are these aspects of the use of a cloak in driving forward some kind of a narrative. And I want to suggest I'm using a cloak here. Yes, we have a cloak. These cloaks are actual physical garments in the surface line reading of our narrative. But I want to suggest that there are many different ways in which we can encloak ourselves, and not only with physical garments, but in persona. So when we read, we can encloak, if you will, words with different meanings than they might appear to have, and that's what we call metaphor. So I just like to, we'll get to that in a moment, and I just want to return to the very opening of our Torah portion, Vayeshev, and Jacob settled. And there is a midrash that our medieval commentator Rashi quotes about this notion about Jacob's desire to settle. Jacob sought to dwell in tranquility. But then the disturbance regarding Joseph sprung upon him. The righteous seek to dwell on tranquility. But the Holy Blessed One said, the righteous do not consider that which is prepared for them in the world to come to be enough for them. They seek to dwell in tranquility in this world as well. Here is this midrash conveying the notion that it's not enough that people who are righteous are going to, at some point, dwell in an afterlife where they will be at peace. They also want peace here while they're here on earth. And there's kind of this divine voice that just describes that desire with some measure of either not contempt, but just how outrageous it is to expect to be able to do that. So if you turn over, share with you commentary from the Ishbitzer Rebbe, one of the great Hasidic rabbis, about this very same verse. Jacob settled in the land of Canaan, in the land of his father's sojournings, Megurei Chaviv. He settled, says the Ishbitzer Rebbe, he settled in the land of his father's fear, and in the land of Canaan, that is the land of humility, and he sought to dwell in peace. This peace obtains when a person behaves in such a way as to keep far from all doubt and guards himself from any evil act. That is the modality of peace. But in response to Jacob's desire for such peace, God told him that as long as a human being lives in a bodily experience, it is impossible to behave with extreme wariness and fear and humility. For God wants human acts, and in this world, human beings must act in love, in ways that are not completely clarified. So the Ishbitzer Rebbe is taking this notion, which we've just read in the Midrash, this sense of either outrage or bewilderment by the divine voice that people expect to be able to have peace of mind when they're living here on earth, when they're alive. And the Ishbitzer Rebbe takes us a little bit further and says, not only is that an unreasonable expectation, it's not a healthy expectation. He seems to be saying that that what he describes here as humility, kana, if you will, a smallness, a restriction of one's mind. That's, I think, the way he's using the word humility here. That one is being overly scrupulous in a moral way, and trying to protect oneself from any encounters that might infect one and corrode one's sense of moral scrupulousness. And the Ishbitzer Rebbe seems to be saying that a worldview that's based too much on fear and humility risks atrophy of the human spirit, that it grants too much power to God. Now, remember here, we're talking about the early, especially the early days of the Hasidic movement, and a spirit of which continues to this day, which is far more concerned with the internal, if you will, spiritual, psychological.
Can't hear you.
which is
Well, we
far.
lost the sound.
I'm sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, okay now.
Okay. That the Hasidic worldview is more concerned with the interior landscape of the human being. That is one psychological dimension, one spiritual dimension, than it is with the external landscape of the world, including the cosmos. And so the Ishbitzer Rebbe is concerned about anything that begins to depress or suppress the development and emergence of a vigorous, engaged human being in both spirit and mind and capacity. So, and he also seems to be saying here in this last sentence that only a vision in which the plot is actually unclear, where anomalies bewilder one, where serene faith and integrities are torn apart, is the possibility of human action become ripe. And that seems to be what is really driving, especially the Hasidic movement, which is to say, all of you poor peasants who have been told that you could not possibly rise to the level of piety, to the closest of God that scholars who are in the yeshivot can reach. The Hasidic movement says it's quite the opposite. You have a profound sense of closeness to God because of the purity of your heart and the fact that you're not dealing with abstractions, but you're dealing with everyday real life. And so this was a revolutionary movement that proclaimed all of you, everyone has the capacity to have a closeness to the oneness that is existence. So it should be not surprising that emerging out of this religious, if you will, spiritual orientation that says everyone carries within them the capacity of greatness and the capacity to find alignment with a healthy way of life, that out of that emerges someone who takes it in a secular direction. And so we have a man named Sigmund Freud, who grew up within a Hasidic heritage. And of course, as an enlightened Jew in the 19th century, in late 19th century, he filters out what he considers to be the religious constraining part of all this, but takes these insights about how the power that dwells within each person in an interior life and takes it in a secular direction. So I want to share with you just some readings from American philosopher Richard Rorty. And some of this is from his book, Contingency, Irony, and Solidarity, and other sections that we're going to read come from some other articles of his. About Freud, Rorty writes, Freud sees every life as an attempt to clothe itself in its own metaphors. Freud let us see that any supposed limit on the range of human possibilities, any religious or philosophical context within which we might hope to put the entire range of human lives, any all-encompassing goal for human beings as such, will always be a projection of some particular choice among those possibilities, a working out of one particular fantasy, a picture of human existence drawn from one particular perspective. The horizon will move on whenever we do. There will be a context beyond every context. Language is to be used as an adaptive tool to cope with the natural and social environments to achieve a desired pragmatic end. It is better to focus on whether one has been imaginative enough to develop interesting alternatives to one's present beliefs. In a foundationless world, creative humanism replaces the quest for an external authority to provide hope for a better future, a future free from dogmatically authoritarian assertions about truth and goodness. So here, Rorty in particular is reacting to how constraining and constrictive any particular philosophical orientation, any particular political doctrine can be by placing limits on what it considers to be either true or possible. And indeed, what he attributes to Freud is Freud's recognition that dwelling within each person is this capacity to have a life of imagination, which can create a much broader vision than the one that might be imposed from the outside. So here's what I just want to suggest about this, and a couple of things. One is the role of metaphor in literature. The role of metaphor in literature is to destabilize us from thinking we know what a rose is, or what a rock is, or what a waterfall is. That it is more than the scientific descriptions that we may give to it. It is also how we experience them. And the experience that we have with each of these objects brings from within us other associations. And those other associations open up other possibilities, other ways of thinking about things. And this notion that Rorty talks about here in the last paragraph, a foundationless world. That in a foundationless world, he says, that's where the creativity of a human being becomes significant. When I read that, I thought about the opening of Torah. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. When we talked about the opening of Genesis, that word Bereshit, we acknowledge that Bereshit is a grammatical, at best, anomaly, if not nonsense. And so it is fascinating that, to me, that a book which is supposed to now tell us, where did everything come from? How did I get here? What's my place in it? And what's happening? And where does it all come from? Instead of opening up with some words that would reassure us and provide us some kind of clarity, instead opens up with ambiguity. Instead of providing a firm foundation for having a clear sense of reality, instead we find ourselves on shifting sands. And I want to suggest that the reason Torah does that is because it wants to provide as the primary lesson the place that human beings have in making meaning in the world. That meaning is not something that is given to us. Meaning is not something that is fixed. And as Paul Lieberman is going to share with us in just a week's time when he reads from Torah in celebration of his 90th birthday, and he's going to read from a Torah scroll which has no punctuation and it has no vowels, that what Torah and a Torah scroll does is it presents itself to us and says, you need to figure this out. You need to figure out how to vocalize these words, which vowels should go in here because they're not there. You need to figure out when to pause with a comma, when to insert an exclamation point, when to insert a question mark, when to insert a period, when to stop, when to go. All of that requires human initiative. I want to suggest that's the primary lesson of Torah. And it's a revolutionary one. And that notion of the power that human beings have, the responsibility that human beings have to create meaning and thus purpose in the world, even transcends in importance with the role of authority. that's also conveyed in Torah, but I want to suggest it's secondary importance. So in my communications this week, I noted that Rashi, our medieval commentator, says, why in the world didn't Torah start off with the very first commandment that was given, which has to do with, this is the first month of the year. You shall observe this as the first month of the year, which we'll read about in Exodus. Why does it start off with this whole thing about the creation of the world? And I want to suggest that it's because Torah doesn't want us to default to the notion that what we're being given is a book having to do with authority and rules. What we're being given is a challenge to our capacity to assert responsibility in the world, to begin to try and figure out what the heck does the world Bereshit mean? And from there, we're in the game. From there, we're running forward, trying to figure out what any of this stuff means, because the meaning of it hasn't been given to us. The responsibility to create meaning has been given to us.
Okay.
And with that, I open it up and love to hear what you experienced and read and shared in this week's portion. Margot.
I know that some of my friends here are going to come up with very esoteric explanations, but going back to the text, these are really foul fellows. Remember, these are the guys that also went in to the town and destroyed it after aren't they the same brothers? So we're not at all surprised that they act this way. They're very foul fellows.
And they are the founders of who we are.
Yeah.
They are the foundation of who we are.
So we should not be surprised that they acted this way, especially when we knew what they did to the town after they thought Dinah was ravaged.
And perhaps we should not be surprised that sometimes we act that way as well, right? That we act with a sense of either lust or avarice or jealousy, right? These things all dwell within us. Okay, but
these are bad guys.
And it, I just want to continue to instead of having us point fingers at someone else, the way we develop is also by redirecting that finger pointing a little bit. So thank you for reminding us. Let me call upon Rose. She has her hand up there.
Sorry again, I don't know what's going on with the video, but yeah, I think that's an interesting thing you said, Margot. And this is the first instance really that the Torah kind of works to establish Judah's predominance. The team Judah is, because Reuven gets kicked off, although he's the oldest, because he goes to his father's concubine before it's his turn. So he's knocked off the list. And Shimon and Levi do the thing with Dinah and killing everybody. So they get knocked off the list. Then we come to Judah, who turns out to be an honorable fellow of sorts in the end of this. And, and then of course the idea that David and the Davidic line eventually come from the Judah Tamar thing, is there. So this is the first instance we're seeing that Team Judah is, rah-rah for Team Judah, and these other guys are just not worthy. So I agree with you on that. Interesting about the dreams, though, when I was in Turkey, there's a place called the Asclepion. And if you know, Asclepius is the father of medicine, and it was basically like a med spa for wealthy people. I don't know if any of you have been there. As a physician, I found it fascinating. And what we were told was every morning, the people would go there with various mental or physical ailments. And these were people who had money. And, it was a very kind of upscale place for the time. But the first thing that happened in the morning when I guess the healers made their rounds among the patients was they would ask them, tell us your dreams.
Yeah.
So you see the importance of dreams in these situations. And I think it ties in with what, Rabbi, you were saying about surrealism, because that's what it is. It's a dream that's painted on canvas. And in how much do the dreams either reveal the reality about ourselves or predict the future? And, this was very, very important to the ancients and to us too.
Yeah, Rose, what do you got? What you're reminding me is the movement that has existed over the last couple of decades within medical schools to introduce literature and the importance of narrative as a way of interviewing patients and being able to get patients to tell their story as part of a diagnostic process, instead of merely relying upon exams and other forms of metrics. Because sometimes when we open ourselves up to telling our story, the patient becomes more empowered and reveals things, perhaps, that a physician's narrow focus on certain kinds of medical tests and examinations might not otherwise reveal. So thank you for that. Kath, yeah.
Well, there's 3 people more, but if I could go after Robert, that would be great.
Okay, so let me call upon Paul and then Robert. Go ahead, Paul. And go ahead and unmute, Paul.
Last week or a week before, I came up with defending a good guy, because this particular group always defending the bad guys, that there's a message in there. And I'm not the first one that came up with the defense of Esau. When I was working with the Israeli aircraft industries, my particular contact happened to be a reserve pilot, and he was an older guy. He'd been flying. You don't quit the Air Force. But he was arguing with a bunch of the religious folks because he had a daughter that wanted to have his daughter bar mitzvah by the wall. And so he was arguing with them, and they called him Esau, the religious guys, because he was arguing. And he was the first one that says, you know what? And he was the first one that told me, when they called me Esau, I was kind of proud of that. And so now, so many years later, I'm hearing, hey, you know what? Maybe we should stick up with some of the nice guys, because there maybe is a lesson there, not always the bad guys.
Okay, thank you, Paul. All right, and let me go on Robert.
It has been said that the letters of negation must exist so that those words which glorify God and his knowledge and his beauty are made all the more clear. I could express it better. I didn't, though. However, I love the example of Joseph. He has the gift of patience, of chastity, of even though knowing that he might walk into injustice, he has trustworthiness. And in the Quran and in the Baha'i writings, there's reference to the divine Joseph, which means the manifestation of God. I'm not saying that Joseph was, that isn't the point. So I love his example. And I think the others, they have a lot to learn. I don't know what their plight is in the next world, but I think Joseph is just a sterling example.
Thank you, Robert. Beautiful. And let me call upon Kath and then David and Susan.
Thanks, Rabbi. I had a couple of thoughts. One of them is that it's always presented, and it's spelled out in Torah, that Joseph was the child of Jacob's old age, and that's why he was so precious to him. And I've always wondered, well, not always, but recently I've wondered if, since he was the first child of Jacob and Rachel, and Joseph really loved Rachel, if possibly that had something to do with it, because, you know, this is the first child of sort of he and his true love. And so I mean, to me, that would be a logical reason that he might be a favorite. And then the other thing I was thinking about is that sort of naivete of Joseph in telling his brothers these dreams that to us seem palpably obvious that they're about, you know, yay, Joseph, and he's leading other, and he's, I think, surprised that they would take it that way. And I just, you know, someone who was a little more streetwise might have not set himself up to have people be angry with him.
Yeah. Yeah, the character Joseph is fascinating, and how as adolescents, we often are not aware of how to use the gifts that we've been given. And sometimes we use them in a way that are injurious to people around us. And it takes a certain degree of wisdom and experience to be able to refine our use of whatever gifts we've been given in a way that's not just self-aggrandizing or injuring.
Lost you again.
Lost you again.
Sorry.
We can't hear you.
Yes, we lost you again, Rabbi.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now? Because there's, I think, thank you. Well, let me call upon David and Susan.
Well, as an aside, it seems to me that Joseph was clearly on the autism spectrum, especially as an adolescent. Both Susan and I have brothers that are somewhere on the spectrum, and they just aren't clued into how other people think or feel or how they react to things. Mm. But what got my hand up was looking at the Dali painting, and is very not germane to what we've been talking about. But there are two things, one of which I'm very unsure of in the painting, that just have a little tiny taste of Dali. One is the third pane up from the bottom. You see some houses reflected that are much larger than things off in the distance. And so to me, it looked like it was a magnifying glass. And in addition, in at least this print, there seems to be an edge along the right edge that shows another border or wall or the edge of something behind the painting.
I think it's a curtain. It looks like a curtain.
No, not the curtain. If beyond the border of the painting,
on the right side,
a tiny little edge of something. That looks like a room, the edge of a room projected to me, which is not very useful, of a room projected behind the face of the painting.
Mm-hmm.
I get you. That's fascinating. Okay, thank you. Yeah, there may be more dimensions there than we presume. Thank you. Okay. Let me. You go ahead.
I was just going to say that I was really struck this time that I guess I never really put it all together before about how Ishmael plays a very prominent place throughout the book of Genesis. I mean, there are Ishmaelites that come and get him from the pit, that buy him from his brother. And Esau married somebody that was Ishmael's daughter. And I think there was even something here about Judah or something, or one of his children that anyhow, I missed all these years that I've been reading the Torah. I missed it.
Yeah, do you want to play with that notion just like for another minute or two, like what it might mean that Ishmaelites are ones that kind of show up at this family site of trauma and take the Joseph into slavery? I mean, it is kind of fascinating.
It is. And it's like, I mean, quite frankly, I thought that Ishmael kind of was out of the picture when Hagar and Ishmael were sent away. And then all of a sudden, when Abraham dies, Ishmael comes and to honor his father. And then Esau marries somebody that's the daughter of Ishmael. And we, as we go through the Torah, there are certain people that are set up as enemies, and all of a sudden, maybe they aren't enemies.
And we're giving an extensive genealogy of Ishmael that you'd expect maybe to find in the Quran rather than in our tradition. And it makes me think that maybe at least Genesis is not just an ancestor of the Jews, but the ancestor of a much larger family of peoples.
So let me, Susan, this is what you got me to thinking, which is that all these characters, if you want to think about them as iconic figures or as metaphors, let's use the word metaphors. Whether it is Korach, whom we'll encounter in a little bit, who we think gets swallowed up, and then his sons appear in Psalms, or whether it is the Ishmaelites who are appearing here, and we thought, oh, they were out of the picture, right? Whether it's Amalek, who we think goes away, and then we're told later, no, he reappears in the form of Haman, centuries later, that all of these energies or all these personalities, whatever you want to call them, that we think are gone, are buried, they are always with us, and have the capacity to resurface either spontaneously without our control, or perhaps, if you want to put it in a therapeutic context, can safely emerge in some kind of controlled environment where you can examine them, talk to them, find out why they are the way they are, and see if you can reach some accord with them in your own personal life. So that's what you got me to thinking. So thank you very much. Let me call upon June and then Richard, okay? And go ahead and unmute. There you go.
I just want to go back to the painting, which I find very compelling in that it seems almost very serene in one sense and almost boring, and yet she's very sexy.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
the garment exposes her very much so. And I find, it's like almost like a dichotomy of you're thinking on one level and then you're thinking on another level. He's kind of got you thinking in a lot of different dimensions. Like you said, the magnifying of the house, doesn't exactly go with the other background. And the window edge is not even. And the drapery on one side is more even than on the other side. So he's playing with a lot of different themes, it seems, or opposites in one picture. And I find that fascinating.
Oh, that's great. The level of detail that you saw there and that you bring to our attention. And I can just imagine, if Dolly were sitting with his therapist and, say, well, that's interesting. Well, why did you paint her that way? Why did you have that? She seems somewhat, she's in a white gown, which make her seem somewhat chaste. And yet the way you have her body positioned indicates something else. What were you thinking? This is great stuff. So thank you for, yes, Anna, yeah. You're gonna, yep.
I don't know if you can see this picture, but it is a photograph of Salvador Dali, fish and a sort of a rock or sculpture thing. And what he says about it is, the hard and the soft must be equivalent in classic work. If in addition they are parallel, they achieve the courtly perfection of Palladian structures. And when I looked at that picture that you chose, I thought, isn't that interesting? And in parallel structures, we have several appearances of women here. We have Potiphar's wife, who is perhaps unholy. We have Tamar, who is, a savior in her way, but they both come from outside.
That's interesting.
you know, we have lots of stories in our tradition where there may be a good or a not so good, as we would say simply, people who are women who are both important.
Fascinating.
And as far as, I just wanted to comment about the dreams. You know, maybe those first dreams that he had were so vivid and so startling that when he woke up in the morning, he just couldn't help but talk about them. Like, what in the world did I see? It's not like going around bragging, but just like being overwhelmed with the brilliance of something that was totally never happened before. You would get up and talk about anything if it was sort of sublimely presented.
Yeah, kind of a youthful exuberance without being aware of the impact that was having on the people around you.
No. Exuberance, period.
Okay.
When something appears so bright in your brain, at whatever age you are, and whatever station in life you are, if something appears so bright that has never appeared there before, the suddenness of it, not the age of it.
Well, and that's the way his father experienced his first dream, which was, I didn't know God would be in this place. Yeah, how awesome. So let me call upon Richard and then Justin. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
I just want to say that Joseph had to get to Egypt somehow. And that's the story. That's the journey we're on. And Reuben, who somebody dissed today, he's the one that says in Genesis, no blood, shed no blood. So everybody's got a little stuff going on. And I think it's premature to judge anybody here, because the purpose of this is to tell us what the journey is of trying to take responsibility. And two little things. One, there's Tamara's eyes, and there's Leah's eyes.
Yep.
And there's another set of twins in here, where the one to be second born reaches and comes out ahead of the one with the crimson. And this is a reminder, there's no more story about that, but it's a reminder that this is a basic theme. And you've got Esau over here, and Jacob over here, and that the separation of Abel and Cain, and these warring tribes that we have, that we live with still and now. This offers us a way to look at that and try and understand one another's side, to form maybe diplomacy, or maybe get some wisdom, so that when the end of it all, we get a chance to take the up escalator and the down. And the last one I have in mind here is that Ishmael. And the quote I have about Ishmael is, "My name is Ishmael, and I alone have escaped to tell thee." And I think that speaks to the notion that whole clan takes up a page and a half of names that we can't pronounce. And why are they there? Because that's the story. That's another child of Abraham.
No, thank you, Richard. And let me call upon Justin. Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Rabbi. Paul still has his hand up, and I want to make sure, he was here before me.
All right, Paul, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead, Paul. Thank you.
Okay, just I want to defend a little bit the business of the dreams, that he was that Joseph was such a big egotist, because one of the going through the same story in past years, there was elsewhere that they emphasized the word that basically Jacob sent Joseph out to check, and what he was doing was having Joseph squeal, the way it was explained to me at that time, on his brothers. Yeah. So what I'm trying to do is saying that the business of Joseph dreaming all these crazy, these wonderful thoughts about himself, how much was the father, they gave the reason that Jacob liked favored the older son because he was good looking and this, that, and the other. But on the other hand, should we be surprised that that son, with all those dreams? Well, the father set him up, and then also the father set up for the hatred, because when if you're used to be squealing on your brothers, Jacob has it isn't maybe all of Joseph's fault. Maybe Joseph did what he was programmed to do.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much,
Right,
Paul.
cool.
And let me call upon Justin.
Thank you, and thank you for this discussion. And I mean, I just wanted to express sort of this movement between perhaps what you're talking about is this literary ambiguity that opens up possibility that comes out of the Dali painting, and this connection to Joseph, to that word that is used to describe him, toar. So there's a loveliness, but then it becomes a suggestiveness that Potiphar's wife picks up on and leads to perdition in one sense. But it's all there, and definitely with Dali. I mean, the issue of the commodification is high. I mean, he got into trouble for commodifying desire, you know, in one sense. But it's right there in the sense of we have to acknowledge that terrible ambiguity in toar, you know.
So just picking up a little bit of what Justin just said, you know, a lot of commentary about Joseph, especially in his encounter with Potiphar, portrays Joseph as not so innocent and not so pure, that there was a part of him that was full of attraction and desire, and yet perhaps is able to extract himself at the last moment. And so mixed up in all of this, going back to, I think it was June who pointed out about the way Dali paints his sister. You know, how is he portraying her in a chaste manner, or is he portraying her with in a manner that expresses some desire, you know, some sensuous feeling within himself as well? And so these things are never so isolated from one another, and that notion that we are always within a hair's breadth of both virtue and villainy, I guess, of both heroism and shame. And I think that's what the Ishbitzer Rebbe is talking about. In a sense, he's saying you need to live within that close relationship of both virtue and villainy, because that's the only place in which human initiative can really exist. If you're isolated from all that, if you're protected from all that, then you have no capacity to really grow and develop and move forward. So thank you all very much for kind of sharing new insights about this remarkable painting by Salvador Dali, all the rich, wonderful things that are happening within this text that we're reading, which of course is only merely a telling of a story that's also happening within each one of us. These close encounters we have, this close relationship between our virtuous self and our non-virtuous self. It happens on a daily, if not moment by moment basis. And just like Joseph, perhaps we will rise above them and extricate ourselves from them. But there may be moments in which we find ourselves like David and Bathsheba, just like David, just totally giving oneself into that moment. And the Hasidic movement was critical of the Talmudic rabbis who removed themselves from daily life, who removed themselves into the safe place called a library, where they could deal with just ideas. And it was the Hasidim that says, when you deal with life on a daily basis, when you're in the mud as a peasant, that's where the real possibilities for both serenity and a sense of attachment to the divine happen. I want to thank each and every one of you for creating this kind of environment where we can do this kind of exploring in a safe and productive manner, and emerge from it hopefully with greater insight, and even more importantly, a greater love for one another. God bless you all. Thank you so much. Look forward to our next gathering. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Good night.
Thank you.